There is a compound sitting in your kitchen right now that researchers have quietly been calling one of the most powerful natural activators of male vascular function ever studied. And when you combine it with olive oil and take it at a specific time of night, something happens inside your blood vessels while you sleep that most men with diabetes have never been given the chance to experience. I am Dr. May Anderson, a urologist specializing in men's sexual health, and I have spent over 20 years working with men over 60 who are dealing with exactly what you are dealing with right now. And what I want to talk to you about today is something specific, not general advice, not eat better, exercise more, manage your stress. Something precise. Something that targets the exact mechanism that diabetes uses to silently dismantle male sexual function from the inside, and something that directly counteracts it. Because here is what most men with diabetes have been told. They have been told that erectile problems are a complication of their condition. Expected. Manageable. Part of the package. And most men accept that because it comes from a doctor, and doctors know things, and so they fold it into the quiet list of losses that come with getting older and having this disease. They stop expecting mornings to feel a certain way. They start avoiding certain conversations with their partners. They tell themselves it is fine. It is not fine. And more importantly, it is not as permanent as you have been led to believe. What diabetes does to erections is not mysterious. It is mechanical. It operates through 3 very specific pathways. And when you understand those pathways, you stop feeling like your body has betrayed you and you start seeing it as a system that has been disrupted. And that can be restored. That shift matters more than you might think, because the men who recover are almost always the men who stopped accepting the decline and started understanding the biology beneath it. So let us start there. The first thing diabetes does is attack your endothelium. The endothelium is the thin inner lining of every blood vessel in your body, and it has one job that is absolutely critical for erections. It produces nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is the molecule that tells your blood vessels to relax and open. When you are aroused, your nervous system sends a signal. Nitric oxide is released, the smooth muscle around the blood vessels in your pelvic region relaxes, blood floods in, and an erection forms. That is the entire mechanism. It is hydraulic. It is about blood flow. And nitric oxide is the trigger. Diabetes damages the endothelium directly. Chronically elevated blood sugar generates something called advanced glycation end products, which are essentially the residue of sugar bonding to proteins in your vessel walls. This residue is inflammatory. It thickens the endothelial lining, makes it stiffer, makes it less responsive. And a stiff, inflamed endothelium produces dramatically less nitric oxide. So the signal that is supposed to tell your blood vessels to open and allow an erection to form becomes weaker, slower, and in some men, almost completely absent. This is not aging. This is chemistry. And chemistry can be influenced. The second pathway is oxidative stress. Diabetes creates a state of chronic oxidative stress throughout the body, which means there are excess free radicals, unstable molecules, circulating in your bloodstream and attacking your tissues. One of the most vulnerable targets is your vascular endothelium. The same lining that produces nitric oxide is being damaged by oxidative stress continuously in a diabetic body. And there is a particularly cruel irony here. Oxidative stress does not just reduce the production of nitric oxide. It actually degrades the nitric oxide that is produced before it can even reach the smooth muscle cells it needs to act on. So you get a double hit. Less production and faster destruction. The signal barely forms before it disappears. The third pathway is something that almost no one talks about, and it is arguably the most insidious of the 3. Diabetes disrupts the enzyme that controls the erection cycle at its most fundamental level. That enzyme is called phosphodiesterase type 5. Its job is to break down the chemical signal that maintains an erection after it forms. In a healthy man, this enzyme works in balance. It allows an erection to form, sustain, and then naturally resolve. But in a diabetic man, the environment of chronic inflammation and oxidative stress throws this balance off entirely. The signaling pathway becomes fragmented. Even when some nitric oxide is produced, even when some blood flow occurs, the downstream signal that is supposed to sustain the erection is unstable. The whole process becomes unreliable. And here is why this matters so much. The most commonly prescribed medications for erectile dysfunction work by inhibiting that same enzyme, phosphodiesterase type 5. They artificially hold the door open. They do not fix the endothelium. They do not reduce oxidative stress. They do not restore nitric oxide production. They bypass the problem rather than address it. And that is why so many men with diabetes find that those medications either stop working over time or never work reliably in the first place. You cannot force a system to perform when its foundation is structurally compromised. What you can do is start repairing the foundation. And that is exactly what the protocol I am going to walk you through does. It starts with olive oil, but not for the reason most people assume. When people think about olive oil and health, they think about heart health, Mediterranean diet, good fats. And yes, all of that is true. But what researchers studying male vascular function have begun to understand is that extra virgin olive oil contains a set of compounds that act with extraordinary specificity on the exact mechanisms that diabetes disrupts. This is not coincidence. The polyphenol in high-quality extra virgin olive oil, and there are over 30 distinct ones, have measurable, documented effects on endothelial function, nitric oxide production, and oxidative stress. All three of the pathways we just discussed. The compound that gets the most attention is oleuropein. Oleuropein is a polyphenol that directly stimulates the endothelial enzyme responsible for nitric oxide production. Not stimulates it vaguely. Stimulates it through a specific signaling pathway. When oleuropein reaches your endothelial cells, it activates something called endothelial nitric oxide synthase, the enzyme that manufactures nitric oxide inside your vessel walls. For a diabetic man whose endothelium has been weakened and whose nitric oxide production has been suppressed, this is not a small thing. This is reaching directly into the broken mechanism and beginning to turn it back on. Then there is hydroxytyrosol, which is one of the most potent antioxidants ever measured in a food source. Its ability to neutralize the free radicals that are degrading your nitric oxide and attacking your endothelium exceeds vitamin C, vitamin E, and coenzyme Q10. In a diabetic body running hot with oxidative stress, hydroxytyrosol acts like a protective shield being placed around your most vulnerable vascular tissue. And then there is oleocanthal, which has anti-inflammatory properties that researchers have compared to ibuprofen in terms of mechanism. It inhibits the same inflammatory enzymes, but naturally, without the side effects. Chronic vascular inflammation is one of the primary drivers of endothelial dysfunction in diabetic men. Oleocanthal goes after that inflammation directly, so olive oil alone is already addressing three separate pathways. But here is where the protocol becomes something genuinely remarkable. When you add a specific compound to that olive oil, something that is almost certainly already in your kitchen, and you take this combination at a precise time before sleep, you trigger a biological convergence that is dramatically more powerful than any of these effects in isolation. And the timing. The reason nighttime specifically matters is something I want to explain carefully, because most people get this wrong. During sleep, your body enters what vascular researchers call the nocturnal repair window. Blood pressure drops. The demands on your cardiovascular system decrease. And your endothelial cells shift into active regeneration mode. The lining of your blood vessels is literally rebuilding itself while you sleep. This is when newly forming endothelial cells are most vulnerable to oxidative damage. And it is also when they are most receptive to the signals that support healthy function. Taking a vascular active compound at this window does not just provide a one-time effect. It provides targeted support during the exact hours when your body's own repair systems are operating most actively. You are working with your biology instead of around it. This is also when testosterone production peaks. The majority of daily testosterone synthesis in men happens during sleep, specifically during the early cycles of deep sleep. Cortisol, the stress hormone that directly suppresses testosterone and constricts blood vessels, should be at its lowest during these hours. In diabetic men with metabolic disruption and often poor sleep quality, cortisol frequently stays elevated into the night, which means testosterone production is blunted precisely when it should be peaking. The compound we are going to add addresses this as well, not as a side effect, as a direct mechanism. The compound is raw cacao powder. Stay with me, because I know what you are thinking. And what I am about to tell you is going to change how you think about this completely. Raw cacao, not cocoa powder from a supermarket shelf, not chocolate, but cold-processed raw cacao powder, contains one of the most studied cardiovascular compounds in nutritional science. It is called epicatechin. And the research on epicatechin and male vascular function is frankly extraordinary. Epicatechin is a flavonol, a type of polyphenol, and it has been studied in over 1,000 peer-reviewed papers. What it does at the molecular level is activate endothelial nitric oxide synthase, the same enzyme that oleuropein from the olive oil activates. But here is the critical distinction that makes the combination so powerful. Epicatechin activates it through a completely different molecular pathway. Oleuropein works through one signaling route. Epicatechin works through a separate one called the PI3K, ACT pathway. When two compounds activate the same target enzyme through two independent routes simultaneously, the combined output of that enzyme is significantly greater than either compound could achieve alone. Researchers call this pharmacological synergy. You are not just adding two effects together, you are multiplying them. But epicatechin does something else. Something that should make every diabetic man who has ever been prescribed a phosphodiesterase inhibitor pay very close attention. Epicatechin inhibits phosphodiesterase type 5, the same enzyme those prescription medications target. It does this naturally, without the cardiovascular risks associated with pharmaceutical PDE5 inhibitors, and it does it in combination with dramatically enhanced nitric oxide production. So you are increasing the signal and prolonging it at the same time. The nitric oxide is being produced in greater quantities through two independent pathways, and the molecule that would normally degrade the downstream erection-sustaining signal is being gently inhibited. And because epicatechin is a fat-soluble compound, its bioavailability when consumed in water-based preparations is remarkably low. A significant portion passes through your digestive system without being absorbed, but when you dissolve it in olive oil, specifically in the oleic acid that makes up approximately 70 to 80% of extra virgin olive oil's composition, absorption through your intestinal wall improves dramatically. The fat-mediated pathway in your small intestine handles lipid-dissolved compounds with far greater efficiency. You are not just combining two powerful compounds. You are using one as the delivery vehicle for the other. 1 tablespoon of high-quality extra virgin olive oil. 1 to 2 teaspoons of raw cacao powder. Stirred together until you have a thick, dark paste. Taken 30 to 60 minutes before sleep. That is the foundation of the protocol. Now I want to add one more layer, because for diabetic men specifically there is a third element that addresses something the olive oil and cacao combination does not fully cover on its own. And this is the piece that I think matters most for the men watching this who have been dealing with this problem for years. Diabetes does not just damage your blood vessels. It creates a state of systemic inflammation that continuously undermines repair. Every night your endothelium tries to regenerate, inflammation is working against it. And one of the primary drivers of that nocturnal inflammation in diabetic men is elevated cortisol. The stress hormone that should be lowest during sleep, keeping your blood vessels constricted, suppressing your testosterone production, and keeping your nervous system in a low-level state of alert rather than deep restorative rest. This is why so many diabetic men over 60 describe a specific pattern. They sleep, but they do not feel rested. They wake at 3 or 4 in the morning. Their mornings feel heavy and slow rather than restored. They have the fatigue of a man whose body spent the night fighting rather than healing. That is cortisol dysregulation. And it is not just making them tired. It is actively dismantling the conditions under which vascular repair and testosterone production can occur. Ashwagandha root powder is one of the most extensively studied adaptogens in clinical research, and its effect on nighttime cortisol is not subtle. The active compounds, called withanolides, have been shown in multiple randomized controlled trials to produce significant reductions in serum cortisol alongside measurable improvements in sleep quality, time to reach deep restorative sleep, and time spent in the most hormonally productive stages of sleep. When cortisol drops appropriately during the overnight hours, your blood vessels relax more fully. Growth hormone pulses more effectively. Testosterone synthesis operates without suppression. Your endothelial repair happens in a biological environment that is actually conducive to repair, not fighting against it. And crucially for our protocol, ashwagandha's active withanolides are fat-soluble compounds. Olive oil is their ideal carrier. When you stir 1/4 to half a teaspoon of high-quality ashwagandha root powder into the olive oil and cacao blend, the oleic acid dissolves those active compounds and delivers them through the fat-mediated absorption pathway with substantially greater efficiency than capsule form or water-based preparations. So now what you have in that small bowl before bed is this. You have oleuropein from the olive oil activating nitric oxide production through one pathway. You have epicatechin from the raw cacao activating the same enzyme through a second independent pathway and simultaneously inhibiting the molecule that degrades the downstream erection signal. You have hydroxytyrosol from the olive oil neutralizing the oxidative stress that would otherwise destroy the nitric oxide before it can act. You have oleocanthal reducing the vascular inflammation that is continuously working against endothelial regeneration. And you have withanolides from the ashwagandha lowering cortisol to create the optimal overnight hormonal environment for vascular repair and testosterone production to occur. These are not separate effects happening in parallel. They are interlocking mechanisms operating on the same system, your vascular endothelium, during the same window, your nocturnal repair cycle, through complementary and in some cases synergistic pathways. The whole is dramatically greater than the sum of its parts. Preparing it takes less than 2 minutes. Into a small bowl, combine 1 tablespoon of high-quality extra virgin olive oil with 1 to 2 teaspoons of raw cacao powder. Stir until the powder is fully incorporated. Add 1/4 to half a teaspoon of ashwagandha root powder, and stir again until you have a smooth, thick, dark paste with an earthy, slightly bitter, surprisingly rich flavor. Take it directly from the spoon or from the bowl, 30 to 60 minutes before sleep. The flavor is complex in a way that many men find genuinely satisfying, almost ceremonial. That matters. When a nighttime practice feels like a ritual rather than a chore, you do it consistently. And consistency is where the biology actually accumulates. If you have not already subscribed to Vital Health Seniors, do that now. Every week we bring you evidence-based, specific, science-grounded content built for men over 60 who are not willing to accept decline as the final chapter. Hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss what we put out. Now I want to talk about what happens over time, because I think one of the most damaging things the medical system does to diabetic men dealing with sexual decline is create the impression that the damage is done and permanent, that the years of elevated blood sugar have left scars that cannot heal. And I want to address that directly because the biology simply does not support that level of fatalism. Your endothelium is not a fixed structure. It is living tissue. It turns over continuously. Endothelial cells regenerate. The question is not whether your body can repair itself. The question is whether the conditions for repair exist. And for most diabetic men over 60, the honest answer is that those conditions have been systematically undermined by a combination of poor vascular nutrition, poor sleep quality, elevated cortisol, and an absence of the specific compounds that their endothelium needs to function. When you begin providing those compounds consistently, the response is not instant, but it is real and it is cumulative. In the first 1 to 2 weeks, many men begin to notice changes in sleep quality before they notice anything vascular. Deeper sleep, easier mornings, less of that 3 a.m. waking pattern. That is the cortisol response from the ashwagandha beginning to normalize the overnight hormonal environment. Sleep improves first because cortisol responds relatively quickly. Over the following 2 to 4 weeks, as the endothelial repair begins to compound, each night building on the night before, men begin to notice morning changes. The vascular signal that produces nocturnal and morning erections, which is a clinical indicator of endothelial health, and not merely a sexual event, begins to strengthen. This is your body's own measurement system telling you that nitric oxide production is recovering, that blood vessel responsiveness is returning, that the tissue damage is being progressively addressed. By 6 to 8 weeks of consistent use, the compounding effect of hundreds of improved overnight repair cycles begins to produce changes that are measurable and noticeable not just physiologically, but emotionally. The men who stay consistent do not just report better erections. They report a change in how they carry themselves, a return of something they had quietly stopped expecting, a willingness to be present in their intimate relationships in a way they had stopped allowing themselves because the disappointment had become too predictable. That return of presence, of showing up fully to their own lives and their own relationships, is what I care about most as a clinician, not the mechanics, the presence. There is something else I want to address for men watching this who are on medication for their diabetes or blood pressure, because this is important. The compounds in this protocol, oleuropein, epicatechin, ashwagandha with analytes, are food-sourced, not pharmaceutical. They work gently and through physiological pathways rather than by overriding your body's chemistry. However, if you are on blood pressure medication, you should be aware that the vascular relaxing effects of this protocol can be additive to your medication's effects. This is generally a positive thing. It may mean your blood pressure responds better, but it is worth monitoring if you are already at the low end of your target blood pressure range. Speak with your doctor about adding this to your routine. Not because it is unsafe, but because good care means keeping your physician informed. Similarly, if you are taking nitrate medications, which are used for certain heart conditions, you should absolutely consult your doctor before adding anything that amplifies nitric oxide production. The combination can lower blood pressure more than expected. Your safety is not negotiable. For everyone else. And that is most of the men watching this. The barrier to starting is genuinely minimal. A jar of raw cacao powder. A quality extra virgin olive oil in a dark glass bottle, not the plastic bottle shelf variety, which often contains oils that have degraded and lost their polyphenol content before you ever open them. Ashwagandha root powder from a reputable supplier. These things together cost less than most supplements, and unlike most supplements, the mechanism of action for each compound has been documented in peer-reviewed literature, not just in marketing copy. A word on the olive oil specifically because this matters more than most people realize. Not all extra virgin olive oil is equal. The polyphenol content in olive oil degrades rapidly with time, heat, and light exposure. A clear plastic bottle of bargain olive oil that has been sitting on a warehouse shelf for 18 months contains a fraction of the active compounds of a freshly harvested, dark glass bottled, estate-sourced extra virgin olive oil. When you are using olive oil as a therapeutic tool, rather than just a cooking fat, the quality of what you buy changes the outcome. Look for a harvest date on the label, not just an expiration date. Look for dark glass. Look for a producer who lists the polyphenol content. Spend slightly more and use it as medicine, which is what it is. The same principle applies to the cacao. Raw cacao powder, cold processed to preserve its epicatechin content, is not the same as the cocoa powder in your baking cupboard. Standard cocoa processing involves high heat, which degrades a significant proportion of the flavonols. Raw cacao costs slightly more and is available in most health food stores and online. The epicatechin content is the reason you are using it, so the processing method matters. I also want to say something about the psychological dimension of this, because I think it is under-acknowledged in the clinical conversation around diabetic men and sexual health. When a man has experienced years of unreliable sexual function, something happens that goes beyond the physical. He starts to disconnect from that part of himself. He stops allowing himself to want. He restructures his relationship with his own desire, because the disappointment of wanting and not being able to has become something he protects himself from. He tells himself it does not matter as much as it used to. He finds ways to avoid the situations where the failure would be visible. This is not weakness. It is a completely human and rational psychological response to repeated disappointment. But it creates its own layer of the problem. Because desire, arousal, and sexual response are not purely hydraulic. They involve the nervous system. They involve the parasympathetic state, the rest and connect mode that your brain needs to be in for full sexual response to occur. A man who has spent years bracing for failure carries a low-level cortisol elevation into every intimate situation. His nervous system is guarded, and a guarded nervous system, however much the physical capacity is restored, will blunt the response. This is another reason the cortisol reduction from the ashwagandha matters beyond its direct vascular effects. As consistent use normalizes the overnight cortisol pattern, men often report not just physical changes, but a shift in their relationship to their own desire, a return of wanting that had gone quiet, a willingness to be present to intimacy rather than managing it from behind a wall of protective expectation. The body and the psychology are not separate systems. Restore the physiology and the psychology begins to follow, not instantly, but consistently, over weeks of improved sleep, reduced physiological stress, and returning vascular function. The guard comes down. And that, more than anything else I could measure in a clinic, is what vitality actually looks like in a man over 60. 1 tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil, 1 to 2 teaspoons of raw cacao, 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of ashwagandha root powder, 30 to 60 minutes before sleep. Every night. That is the protocol. It is not complicated. It does not require willpower. It does not require you to overhaul your life. It requires consistency and the understanding that your body, even now, even with diabetes, even after years of vascular damage, retains the capacity to repair itself when given the right conditions. You have not lost this. Your body has been working in a compromised environment. Give it the right tools at the right time and watch what it does. That is what I want to leave you with today. Not a list of problems. Not a catalog of what diabetes has taken. A very specific, very actionable, biologically grounded path back towards something you have been told was gone. Because in 20 years of working with men exactly like you, the one thing I have learned with absolute certainty is that the men who believe recovery is still possible are always right. And the men who have accepted the decline as final find a way to confirm that too. You are watching this video. That means something. It means you have not accepted it. Good. I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single comment on this channel, and knowing who is out there watching helps me make every video better for you. And if this spoke to something you have been living with privately, type the number 1 below. You do not have to say anything else. Just 1. So I know you are there, and so you know you are not alone. If you found this valuable, please share it with a man in your life who needs it. Not as a hint, as a gift. Because the information gap around diabetic men and sexual health is real, and the only way it closes is when men like you pass it forward. I am Dr. May Anderson. This is Vital Health Seniors. Take care of your body tonight, and I will see you in the next one.